The crystal vase slipped from Vivienne's fingers and exploded against the marble floor, but the sound was nothing compared to the shattering happening inside her chest as she watched the man she'd loved in silence for 8 years kiss another woman in his penthouse living room. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there in the doorway like a ghost who had accidentally stumbled into the wrong haunting. Her black heels were planted on the threshold between the hallway and his world, crystal fragments glittering around her feet like 1,000 broken promises. Julian Mercer Enterprises, the man who had owned her heart since the day she walked into his office with coffee stains on her resume and too much audacity for someone with nothing to lose, had his arms wrapped around a woman who looked like she had stepped directly off the cover of Fashion magazine. Ian recognized her from the society pages, from the whispered office gossip, from the sinking feeling she had been carrying in her stomach for weeks. The penthouse smelled like his cologne. Wheat some like his cologne. IDD. She had bought it for him 3 Christmases ago, wrapped it herself, left it on his desk with a card that said nothing more than "Because you deserve nice things." He had worn it every day since, never knowing that every time she caught that scent, it felt like a small, beautiful torture. Julian pulled away from Isabel at the sound of the crash, his dark eyes finding Vivienne's across the expansive living room. The city glittered behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan spread out like a jewel box, and Vivienne thought absurdly that she had never felt smaller than she did in this moment, standing in the doorway of his world, an intruder in a life she had helped build, but had never truly belonged to. His voice carried that familiar note of casual authority, the same tone he used in board meetings, the same tone he used when asking her to reschedule his appointments. What are you doing here? What was she doing here? The question echoed in her mind like a cruel joke. She was doing what she always did, anticipating his needs, making his life easier, being indispensable while remaining invisible. The Nakamura contract. She had driven across the city at 9 o'clock at night because he needed it signed before midnight, and she had thought, stupidly, pathetically, that bringing it herself would give her one more moment in his presence before he left for London. For he disappeared from her life for 6 months to open the new International before everything changed hot dark right now. For Toost had white now. She just had met until now they feared. Fear or already fear these sword wait about right now. I promise you what happens next will stay with you long after this video ends. Your support means everything to this channel. Isabel looked between them with perfectly arched eyebrows, her lips still slightly swollen from kissing him. Is this your assistant, the one you are always talking about? Always talking about, the words should have warmed her. Instead, they felt like ice water poured directly into the wound that was already bleeding inside her chest, because being talked about was not the same as being seen. Being mentioned was not the same as being loved. Being his assistant, his work wife, his indispensable right hand, was not the same as being his. I'll come down to the car, Julian said, already moving toward Vivienne, his shirt slightly untucked, his lips still dark from kissing someone else. You didn't need to bring it yourself. You could have sent a courier, but she hadn't wanted to send a courier. She had wanted to see him. She had wanted one more moment, one more look, one more chance to pretend that the ache in her chest was something manageable, something survivable, something that 8 years hadn't turned into a permanent part of her anatomy. Don't bother. Vivienne heard her own voice as if from a great distance, steady and professional and completely at odds with the devastation happening beneath her skin. She reached into her bag, pulled out the folder with hands that somehow did not shake, and held it out to him. Just sign here and here. I'll courier it first thing in the morning. She could not look at him. If she looked at him, she would break, and Vivienne Laurent did not break. She had survived her father's death at 17. She had put herself through university while working 3 jobs. She had built herself into someone valuable, someone capable, someone who did not fall apart over unrequited love. Julian took the folder, signed where she indicated, his cologne wrapping around her like a familiar ghost. She kept her eyes fixed on his hands, on the pen moving across the paper, on anything except his face. Vivienne, his fingers caught her wrist as she turned to leave, and the touch burned through her like fire. "Are you okay?" Was she okay? She almost laughed. She had spent 8 years being okay, 8 years loving him through his failed relationships, through late nights when he poured his heart out to her about everything except the one thing that mattered, through his engagement to Victoria Harrison that had ended in spectacular flames 6 months ago. She had waited and hoped and convinced herself that maybe, someday, he would see her as something more than convenient. But he was kissing Isabelle Fontaine in his penthouse, and Vivienne was delivering contracts at 9 o'clock at night, and nothing had changed. Nothing would ever change. "I am perfect," she said, and this time she did meet his eyes. Dark brown, flecked with amber in the right light, eyes she had memorized over 8 years of loving him in silence. "Congratulations on the London expansion. I am sure you and Isabel will be very happy there." Something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe, concern. But before he could respond, Vivienne was gone, her heels clicking against the hallway floor, the elevator doors closing between them like a final curtain, falling on a play she had never auditioned for. The tears didn't come until she was in her car, alone in the parking garage, surrounded by concrete and silence. And when they did, they came like a flood, 8 years of suppressed longing pouring out of her in ugly, gasping sobs that echoed off the walls and came back to mock her. She had done this to herself. She had fallen in love with a man who had never asked her to, who had never promised her anything beyond a salary and professional respect, who had never looked at her the way he had been looking at Isabelle Fontaine. The heartbreak was her own fault, her own creation, her own private catastrophe, but knowing that did not make it hurt any less. Vivienne Laurent had mastered the art of invisibility over 8 years, and she had finally become so good at it that the man she loved could not see her at all. That night, alone in her apartment, she made a decision. The resignation letter took 3 attempts to write. The first version was too emotional, too revealing, too much like a confession she had no right to make. The second version was too cold, too professional, too much like the mask she had worn for 8 years. The third version was simple, direct, and devastating. 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. She printed it at 2 in the morning, when the silence of her apartment became unbearable, when the walls felt like they were closing in, when she could still smell his cologne on her clothes, and it made her want to scream. 8 years. She had given him 8 years of her life, and she had nothing to show for it except a broken heart and a folder full of memories she would have to learn to forget. The morning arrived too soon, grey and heavy with the threat of rain. And de bidens kondes kantitatati, biden stod ans kodabin, kantrachen sushens to problems, he den trek, diben no zathalat sushens taus. She had brought him kantrakent, tentrak. She had been his shadow, his secrets, and now she was going to walk away from all of it, from him, from the life she had built around a man who had never truly seen her. The KPN voice cut through the intercom chateau and detracted. Black, 2 sugars. 2 sugars. Well, he only added the second sugar when he was stressed. She had noticed that pattern 4 years ago and had filed it away in the endless mental catalogue of things she knew about Julian Mercer that he would never know. She knew right away, she responded, her voice steady despite the letter bar ning against her chest. She made his coffee first. She always made his coffee first. It was ritual, routine, one of the 1,000 small devotions she had offered him over the years, without ever expecting anything in return. Then she gathered the projections from her desk and walked into his office for what might be the last time. Hups heit light liefs Hans Froju tanda v Vi's eyes, Chen fall hot with the familiar Fatimais. Pitul leader fought her hard, Pinchais. Cadet Fedios said. Set them there, he said, gesturing vaguely at the corner of his desk already cluttered with documents. Vivienne placed the folder down, then the coffee, positioning the handle exactly how he liked it. Her hand brushed against a photograph she had never seen before, and she froze, Julian and Isabel, both of them laughing, caught in a moment of private joy. The woman's hand rested possessively on his chest, exactly where Vivienne had imagined placing her own hand 1,000 times. "That is Isabel," Julian said. Finally looking up and catching her staring, he smiled, and it was genuine, and it shattered something inside her that she had not realized was still intact. "We're making it official at the Laurent Foundation Gala next week. She wants to meet you, actually. Says she has heard so much about my work wife." Work wife, the phrase hit her like a physical blow. 8 years of devotion, 8 years of silent love, reduced to a cute title, a joke, something to be shared with the woman who actually got to touch him, kiss him, build a life with him. "Congratulations," Vivienne heard herself say. "She seems lovely." "She is." Julian's smile widened, and Vivienne saw something in his eyes she had been waiting 8 years to see directed at her happiness, real, uncomplicated happiness. "I think this might be it, Viv, the real thing, a real thing, as opposed to what? As opposed to the woman who had held his hand through business failures, who had slept on his office couch during the Morrison acquisition, who had cancelled her own birthday dinner 3 years running because he needed her. "I am happy for you," she lied. And then, before she could stop herself, before she could lose her nerve, "There is something I need to give you." She pulled the envelope from her pocket and placed it on his desk with trembling fingers. Julian frowned, reaching for it with the casual curiosity of a man who expected nothing significant. She watched his expression change as he read, confusion first, his brow furrowing as his eyes scanned the page. Then something darker, sharper, his jaw tightening in a way she had seen 100 times before when a deal went wrong. "This is a joke," he said flatly. "It is not. 2 weeks' notice." He stood abruptly, the letter crushed in his fist. "After 8 years, you are giving me 2 weeks. What is this about, Vivienne? Did someone poach you? Is it money? I'll match whatever they're offering. I'll double it. It is not about money." "Then what?" He moved around the desk, and suddenly he was too close, his presence overwhelming in that way she had never been able to armor herself against. "Talk to me. You can't just leave. You are essential. The company needs you. The company. No, him. The company." "I've trained Rebecca extensively," Vivienne said, her voice cracking despite her best efforts to hold it together. "She is more than capable of handling your schedule, and I've documented all the processes, all your preferences. The transition will be seamless." "I don't want Rebecca." Julian's voice was sharp, with something she could not identify, frustration, maybe, or fear. "I want you." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning he did not intend and she could not bear. "You don't want me, Julian." She finally met his eyes, letting 8 years of buried pain surface for just a moment. "You want your assistant. You want someone who anticipates your needs and makes your life easier and never asks for anything in return. That is not me anymore. I can't be that person anymore. What are you talking about? You've never asked for anything. You've always been." The word escaped before she could stop it, raw and honest and devastating. "Always been invisible, and I did it to myself. I let you see exactly what you wanted to see because I was too afraid to show you anything else." Julian stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes that she could not identify. "Vivienne, if this is about the workload, the hours, I can." "It is not." She stepped back, creating distance she desperately needed. "Accept the resignation, Julian. Please, I need to go." Vivienne, wait, but she did not wait. Out of his office, out of his life, fortgekende so, trying to convince self. Fortgete self, therefore self, was the right choice, was his wife. The right to enter convince herself. The space was smaller than her desk at Julian's company, but it was hers. Her name was on the door, her decisions mattered. Her future did not revolve around a man who had never truly seen her. Her phone buzzed for the 47th time that day. Julian. Again she declined the call, just like she had declined the previous 46. The text stopped after the first 100, went waza. He case to our shape, to number fiend to, had finding, new sea kept trying to of each of finding new do. kept trying to once happy wenge. Westy, libije tha kafia too. Find a talk to a venture. Her sister Margot, in the doorway, with 2 glasses of wine, even though it was 5. They had developed a ritual of decompressing together after work, and Vivienne was grateful for it. He showed up at Mammon's restaurant yesterday asking if she knew where you'd moved. What did she tell him? That she'd stab him with a bread knife if he didn't leave her customers alone. Margot settled into the chair across from Vivienne's desk, her dark eyes soft with concern. But seriously, Viv, the man looks destroyed. Whatever's going on with him and that model Isabel, whatever, it doesn't seem to be making him happy. Mammon said he looked like he hadn't slept in days. No, my problem anymore. Vivienne took a long sip of wine, ignoring the way her chest ached at the thought of Julian suffering. She had spent his well-being. She was done. I spent 8 years making his problems my problems. I am done. Margot's eyebrow arched in that knowing way that made Vertown want to throw something at her. Because you still check his company's stock price every morning, and you ride watching a colon commercial. I had allergies. You had feelings, and that is okay, Viv. Margot's expression softened. I watched you love that man in silence for almost a decade. You are allowed to grieve it. You are allowed to be angry, but you are also allowed to know the truth. What truth? Margot hesitated, swirling her wine like she was deciding how much to reveal. The truth about why he is so desperate to find you. The truth about why his engagement to Isabel ended the night after you resigned. Vivienne's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. What? Oh, you didn't know. Margot's smile was equal parts sympathy and satisfaction. The night of the Laurent Foundation Gala, the one where he was supposed to make it official with Isabel, he apparently made a scene instead. Told her in front of half the city's elite that he couldn't marry her because he was in love with someone else. That is not, he wouldn't. Witnesses, Viv, multiple, including Aunt Celeste, who was catering the event and got an earful from all the society gossips. Margot leaned forward, her eyes intent. He didn't name you specifically, but he said he'd been blind for years. Said his assistant was the only person who'd ever truly known him, and he'd been too stupid and scared to realize that knowing someone that deeply, being known that deeply, that was love. That was the love he'd been searching for in all the wrong places. Vivienne's hands were shaking. You are lying. I've never lied to you in my life. Margot pulled out her phone, showing a gossip blog headline that made Vivienne's blood run cold. Mercer Air ends engagement in dramatic gala confession. Mystery woman at center of scandal. This doesn't make sense. He never, I was just his assistant. He said so himself. His work wife. A convenient fixture in his life. Maybe that is what he told himself because the alternative was too terrifying. Margot finished her wine and stood. Look, I am not saying you should run back to him. What you did took incredible strength. Viv, walking away from someone you love to save yourself. That is not weakness. That is survival. But maybe, just maybe, you should hear what he has to say. If you are feeling these emotions right now, I need you to drop a comment below, telling me what would you do in Vivienne's position. Would you hear Julian out, or would you protect your heart? And if this story is hitting different, smash that like button. It truly helps more than you know. No, let's see what happens next. Before Vistet Vostat for standing her doorway, looking exactly as Margot had, Petit V, Kabisi Dribard, Wizzy Xitribard, Kadi as Margot had D, Fixigad, desperate. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, his jaw shadowed with stubble. She had never seen him wear. I had to bribe 3 people and threaten to buy this building to find you, he said, his voice raw with something that sounded like relief. Which I will absolutely do, if that is what it takes to get you to talk to me. Margot stood, gathering her things with impressive speed. I'll give you 2 some privacy. Viv, call me if you need backup. Julian, if you hurt her again, my mother really will use that bread knife. She slipped out, leaving Vivienne alone with the man she had spent 8 years loving, and 3 weeks trying desperately to forget. "You shouldn't be here," Vivienne said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I know." He did not move from the doorway, as if afraid she would bolt if he came closer. "I shouldn't have done a lot of things, like spending 6 years in love with you and never having the courage to say it." The world tilted. Vivienne gripped the edge of her desk, suddenly unsure if her legs would hold her. "Julian, let me finish, please." His voice cracked on the word, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Vulnerability. Raw, unguarded vulnerability. "You told me I never saw you, that you were invisible, and you were right. But not because I didn't see you, because I saw you so completely, so overwhelmingly, that I had to pretend I didn't. I had to make you my assistant in my head because the alternative was admitting that you were the center of my entire universe." He moved forward slowly, carefully, like approaching something wild and wounded. "Every relationship I've had in the past 8 years failed because of you. No, because you did anything wrong, because you were perfect, because no one measured up, because I'd come home from dates and call you at midnight to discuss quarterly reports, just to hear your voice, because Isabel finally looked at me and said, 'You are not in love with me. You are in love with the woman who knows your coffee order better than I know your middle name.'" Tears were streaming down Vivienne's face now, and she could not stop them. "And she was right," Julian continued, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I am in love with you. I've been in love with you since you showed up for your interview 8 years ago with coffee stains on your resume and told me you weren't going to apologize because perfection was boring anyway. I've been in love with you through every late night, every crisis, every moment you made me better than I deserved to be." He stopped just inches away from her, his hands trembling at his sides, like he wanted to reach for her but did not dare. "I know I have no right to ask anything from you. I know I spent years making you feel like you were less than everything. But Chafee and I cheese give me a chance to show you what you've always been to me. What you'll always be. The love I was too afraid to claim because losing you felt worse than never having you. You hurt me." The words came out broken, jagged with 8 years of suppressed pain. "Every day for 8 years you hurt me. No, because you were cruel, but because you never let me in. You let me see everything about you while hiding what I needed most. And I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it if you let me." He finally reached for her, his fingers gentle as they brushed away her tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I probably don't deserve your love. But I am done being afraid of what I feel. I am done pretending you are just my assistant, or my friend, or my anything other than the woman I want to build my entire life around. What about Isabel? What about the woman I watched you kiss in your penthouse, a set-up from my mother, trying to push me toward someone appropriate, someone safe? It meant nothing. I ended it 5 minutes after you walked out, and I spent the next 3 weeks trying to figure out how to tell you the truth." His forehead touched hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "Then you quit, blocked my calls, and disappeared from my life like you'd never existed in it at all. I thought I'd lost you forever. I had to leave, Julian. I couldn't keep breaking my own heart every day. I know," his voice was barely a whisper, "I know, and I am so sorry. For every moment I made you feel invisible when you were the only thing I could see. For every time I treated you like you were just my assistant when you were the reason I got up every morning. For being too much of a coward to risk everything and tell you that I've been in love with you since the day you brought me soup when I had the flu and stayed up all night helping me finish the Reynolds presentation." "That was 6 years ago," Vivienne whispered. "I know exactly how long it has been. I know every moment I should have told you and didn't, every chance I let slip away because I was afraid." His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. "But I'm not afraid any more. Vivienne and I am terrified, but not of losing my assistant or my friend. I am terrified of losing the woman I love, because I was too stupid to tell her the truth when it mattered." Vivienne searched his eyes, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was another misunderstanding in a long line of missed connections. But all she saw was raw, honest vulnerability. All she saw was love, Don't know if I can trust this, she admitted, her voice small. I don't know if I can trust that you won't wake up tomorrow and realize this was a mistake. Then let me prove it to you. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones with a tenderness that made her want to weep. Every single day for the rest of our lives, let me prove that you were never invisible to me, that you were never just anything. Let me prove that the woman who has owned my heart for 6 years is the only woman who ever will. You really ended things with Isabel, the same night you resigned. I stood in the middle of the gala, surrounded by everyone who matters in this city, and I told her I couldn't marry her because I was in love with my assistant, because I'd been in love with my assistant for years, but because I was an idiot who had let the best thing in my life walk away because I was too afraid to reach for it. What did she say? She said she'd known all along. She said she could see it in the way I talked about you, the way I smiled when I said your name, the way I was never fully present with her because part of me was always with you. Julian laughed, but it was bitter, self-directed. Everyone could see it but me. Or maybe I saw it and just refused to believe it because believing it meant risking everything. Vivienne stood in silence for a long moment, her heart at war with her head. He had hurt her. For years he had hurt her, not through cruelty, but through blindness, through fear, through 1,000 small moments when he had failed to see what was right in front of him. But he was here now. He was fighting now. He was fighting now. He was finally saying the words she had spent 8 years longing to hear. I can't go back to being your assistant, she said finally. I don't want you to be my assistant. His lips brushed against her forehead. I want you to be my partner, my equal, my everything. I am scared, Julian. I spent so long loving you from a distance that I don't know how to do it up close. What if we ruin it? What if we can't survive being more than what we were? Then we figure it out together. His hands slid into her hair, tilting her face up to his. We fight and we fail and we try again. But Vivienne, my darling, invisible Vivienne, I'd rather have a messy, complicated, terrifying love with you than a perfect, empty life without you. She kissed him. It was not gentle. It was 8 years of suppressed longing per Wally, a single, searing moment. Wishy was something something he had been waiting his whole life to hold. She let herself finally believe that maybe she had been seen all along. They stood there for what felt like hours, learning the shape of each other's mouths, making up for lost time with every touch. When Margot's voice eventually floated up from the street below, demanding to know if she needed to call the police on the man harassing her sister, Vivienne pulled back just long enough to shout that she was fine. More than fine. Wadi pruli desta, is trudy kun fi sais, we tu thou, me love you ter father ti, or nephew were never on. Even when you didn't know it, even when I was too afraid, you were never low, in this. I was right there with you, loving you in silence, being just as afraid, just as invisible in my own way. We were both idiots, complete idiots. He smiled, and it was the smile she had seen him give Isabel, the one that had shattered her heart in his penthouse, only now it was directed at her, and it meant everything. But we're done being idiots now. We're done being afraid. What happens next, whatever we want? He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, like they had always belonged there. I am not going to London. I told the board I wasn't leaving New York under any circumstances. You've been planning that expansion for 2 years, and I've been in love with you for 6. Which do you think matters more? Through her tear, the sound-breaking Sideherd bent fortlutlang. The first 6 months were the first 6 months. Dating Julian was nothing like working for him. He was Ravender K's, leaving books he thought she would like on her desk at Drake, texting her terrible puns during boring meetings, showing up at her boxing class and getting thorough humiliated by her trainer while she watched and laughed, until her sides hurt. Politics, pizza toppings, whether Die Hard was a Christmas movie, and Vivienne discovered that she loved him even more when he was passionate and stubborn and completely, utterly wrong, because fighting with Julian meant being seen by Julian. It meant being important enough to argue with. It meant being his equal instead of his employee. But it was not perfect. It was never going to be perfect. There were moments when old patterns tried to resurface, when Julian would slip into boss mode and Vivienne would retreat into assistant mode, both of them forgetting they were equals now. Those moments scarred her, made her wonder if they could really escape the dynamic that had defined them for so long. The first real test came 4 months in. They were at a countryside bed and breakfast, their first real vacation together, surrounded by rolling hills and quiet, and the kind of peace that felt almost too good to be true. Julian had promised her a full weekend with no work, no phones, no distractions, just the two of them learning how to be together without the structure of an office to hide behind. And then his phone rang. Vivienne watched him reach for it, watched the familiar mask of CEO slide over his features as he checked the screen, and felt her heart clench with old fear. "It is Marcus," he said, already standing. "There is a situation with the Harrington account. I just need to—" "Julian." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, and he stopped, turning to look at her with confusion. "Whoa, nothing, you should take that," but in his hand studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "But tell me what you are thinking," he said quietly. "We are not going to retreat into work mode, Julian. No with you." The words came out before she could stop them. "I am scared that every time work calls, I'll become invisible again, that you'll forget I am your partner, and remember." He put the phone down, ignoring the insistent buzzing, and crossed the room to take her hands. "You were never just my assistant, Vivienne. You were the woman I came to work hoping to see, the person I wanted to impress with every success. The reason I even cared about building something meaningful. Then why does it feel like you are about to disappear into that phone the same way you disappeared into work for 8 years? The question hung between them, heavy with the weight of old wounds that had not fully healed. Wardian be forth for the refunds, for the same fatars that had kept them apart for Nadia. "You are right," he said quietly. "You are absolutely right, and I am sorry. I spent so many years keeping you at arm's length that I don't always know how to do this differently, how to be a partner instead of a boss." He stepped closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "But Vivienne, you are never invisible to me. Even when I am distracted or overwhelmed or handling a crisis, you are the most visible person in my world. Then prove it." The words came out as a challenge. "No with words, Julian, prove it with actions. Because I need to know that I matter more than Mercer Enterprises, that our relationship isn't just another thing you are managing between board meetings." If you want proof, something flickered in his eyes. "Tomorrow I am restructuring the executive team. I am delegating 80% of crisis management to Marcus and the board, and I am implementing a policy that unless someone is literally dying or the company is burning down, I am unreachable after 6 and on weekends. You can't do that. Mercer Enterprises is your life's work. You are my life, Vivienne. The company is just what I do. You are who I am." His thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "I love you more than I love success, more than I love money, more than I love being in control of every single detail. And if I am making you feel secondary to any of that, then I am failing at the only thing that actually matters." Vivienne felt her anger dissolve into something softer, deeper. "I don't want you to give up your dreams for me. I am not giving them up. I am just making room for new dreams, better dreams." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like a promise. "Dreams that include coming home to you every night, taking vacations where we actually turn off our phones, building a life that is bigger than conference rooms and quarterly reports." "Will do, see Daibao." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "Dreams where the woman I love never has to wonder if she is enough, because she is more than enough, she is everything." They made up properly after that, in the way that only couples who have fought and forgiven can. And Trudian restructured Mercer Enterprises when they returned to the city, carving out space in his life for what mattered most. It was not always easy. There were setbacks, old habits that tried to resurface, moments when they had to remind each other of the promises they had made. But they kept choosing each other, kept fighting for what they were building, kept proving that love was not just a feeling but a decision made daily. Can we take a moment if you've ever felt invisible in a relationship, or if you've ever had to fight to be seen? Drop a heart in the comments. Your stories matter too. And if Julian's transformation is giving you hope, share this video with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to fight for love. The months that followed were filled with a kind of healing Vivienne had not known she needed. She learned to trust that she would not become invisible again. She learned to speak up when something bothered her instead of retreating into silence. She learned that loving Julian up close was terrifying and messy and infinitely better than loving him from a distance. And Julian learned too. He learned to prioritize presence over productivity. He learned that vulnerability was not weakness but strength. He learned that the woman he had been afraid to lose for 6 years was even more extraordinary than he had imagined. And he told her so every day until she started to believe it. They had conversations they should have had years ago, about her father's death and the walls she had built to survive it, about his fear of vulnerability and the ways he hid behind work, about the parallel loneliness they had both carried, loving each other in silence, too afraid to reach for what they wanted. "Why didn't you ever tell me how you felt?" Julian asked one night as they lay tangled together in his bed, the city lights casting soft shadows across the ceiling. Vivienne was quiet for a moment, considering the question she had asked herself 1,000 times. "Because you were my boss," she said finally. "Because the power dynamic was impossible to ignore. Because I watched you date all those other women, and I thought, if he wanted me, he would say something. He would make a move. The fact that he never did meant he didn't feel the same way. I was terrified." Julian admitted, his voice rough with old pain. "You worked for me. You depended on how could I pursue something romantic without it feeling coercive. Without you feeling like you had to say yes, because I signed your paychecks. So we both stayed silent. For 6 years of tears, for 6 years of tour." She rode to face him, her hand resting over his heart. "All that wasted time, Julian. All those years we could have had this. I know," he covered her hand with his own, "but maybe we needed that time. Maybe we needed to become the people who were ready for this. I wasn't ready, Vivienne. I was too caught up in work, too afraid of failure, too convinced that love was something that happened to other people. You were ready long before I was. I don't know if I was ready either. I was so busy being invisible that I forgot how to be seen. I forgot how to ask for what I wanted. It took leaving you to remember that I was worth fighting for. You were always worth fighting for." He kissed her softly. "I was just too blind to see it. We were both blind, but we see each other now. We do." He smiled against her lips. "And I am never going to stop looking." 1 year after Vivienne's resignation, 1 year after the day that had broken her heart and remade it into something stronger, Julian took her back to Mercer Enterprises. No to his office, but to the rooftop garden, the one she had helped design 5 years ago, when she had convinced him that employees needed green space to be productive. First höll sa she had done, with restad or zefi day, toditarten force, kolditan vid arts, for d, had bidrans for vidarthar fi. Candles flickered along every pathway, their light soft and golden evenly. White flowers cascaded from every planter, filling the air with the scent of jasmine and roses. And there, in the center of it all, stood Julian, looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "Julian." Her voice came out as a whisper. "What is this?" "This is the place where you made me better," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Every corner of this building reminds me of you. Every conference room where you saved me from my own mistakes. Every late night where you were the only person who made the work feel meaningful. But this garden, Vivienne, this was your gift to me. Your proof that you saw possibilities I was too blind to imagine." He took her hands, and she realized his were trembling. "I spent 8 years loving you in silence, 6 of those years being too afraid to reach for you. I watched you work beside me every single day, and I told myself that what we had was enough. That being your boss was better than losing you entirely. Often my choose when you wakshu, choose anything. The love I was to vivi in the va fivi. What juramdi. You were the most vibrant, irreplaceable person in my world. I was just too you. Too afraid to risk what we had for what we could have been. He pulled a velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a ring that made her heart stop. An elegant diamond surrounded by sapphires that matched her eyes perfectly, set in a band that looked like it had been designed specifically for her hand. I don't deserve another chance, he continued, his voice breaking. I don't deserve your forgiveness or your love or any of the grace you've shown me this past year, but I am asking anyway because I can't imagine my life without you in it, because coming home to you is the only success that matters, because every dream I have for my future has you standing at the center of it. Behind her, she heard gasps and whispers, and she turned to see their families emerging from behind the ornamental hedges. Her mother clutching a handkerchief and already crying. Margot, phone raised to record every moment. Julian's grandmother, beaming with the satisfaction of someone who had seen this coming years ago. Marry me, Julian said, and it was not a question but a plea. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are always the love I was searching for, that I see you, Vivienne. I have always seen you, and I will never stop. Yes, the word burst from her lips before he had even finished speaking. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that shook, and then he was standing, pulling her into his arms, kissing her while their families cheered, and the candles flickered and the city spread out below them like a promise. I love you, he whispered against her lips. I loved you when you walked through my office door with coffee stains on your resume. I loved you every day after, even when I was too foolish to say it, and I love you until my last breath. I love you too. She was crying, laughing, overwhelmed with a joy she had never dared to imagine. I loved you when you were impossible and oblivious and mine only in my dreams. And I love you now, that you are mine in reality. They were married 6 months later in her mother's restaurant, surrounded by the people who had watched them dance around each other for years. The ceremony was small and intimate, exactly what they wanted. No grand ballroom, no society photographers, no pretense. Just two people who had finally found each other, surrounded by everyone who had loved them through the journey. Margot's maid of honor speech was legendary, equal parts roast and celebration, leaving everyone in tears of laughter. I have watched these two idiots pine for each other since the Bush administration, she declared, raising her glass. And I am thrilled to finally witness them figure out what the rest of us knew all along, that they were made for each other, that they were always going to end up here, that sometimes love isn't about timing, it is about finally being brave enough to reach for what you want. Julian's grandmother offered her own blessing, taking Vivienne's hands and looking at her with eyes that held generations of wisdom. Love him loudly, she said, argue often, and never let him forget how lucky he is. I won't, Vivienne promised. I never will. When the officiant pronounced them married, when Julian kissed his wife for the first time, Vivienne felt every painful moment of the past 8 years transform into something luminous, because the truth was, all those years of silence had taught them how to listen. All those years of fear had taught them how to be brave. And all those years of invisible love had taught them how to see what really mattered. As they swayed through their first dance, Julian pulled her close, his lips at her ear. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For not giving up on me, for loving me even when I was too afraid to love you back, for being patient with a man who didn't deserve your patience. You were worth the wait. She pulled back to look at him, to really look at him. This man who had owned her heart for 8 years and had finally claimed it, every painful, beautiful second of it. He kissed her then, deep and slow, a promise of forever in every touch. 5 years later, Vivienne stood in the doorway of their brownstone, watching Julian chase their daughter across the living room while she shrieked with laughter. Sophie had Vivienne's eyes and Julian's stubborn determination, a combination that made her both irresistible and exhausting. She was 3 years old, obsessed with dinosaurs, and completely convinced that her father existed solely to provide entertainment and piggyback rides. "Daddy can't catch me," Sophie announced, scrambling behind the couch with the confidence of someone who had never lost at anything in her short life. "Daddy is getting old," Julian groaned, but he was smiling, and Vivienne felt her heart swell with a love that never seemed to stop growing. This was what she had dreamed of during all those years of invisible devotion. No, the penthouse or the status or the glamorous life of a billionaire's wife, but this, the chaos and the laughter and the everyday moments that added up to something extraordinary. Coming home to a man who saw her, who chose her, who loved her with every breath he took. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep and the house was quiet, they sat on the back porch with glasses of wine, watching the stars appear above the city skyline. "Do you ever regret it?" Julian asked, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "The years we lost." Vivienne considered the question, turning it over in her mind like a stone. "Sometimes," she admitted, "when I think about all the moments we could have had, all the time we spent loving each other in silence, it hurts to know how much we missed. But I also think when we were supposed to, I wasn't ready to be seen, Julian. I had spent so long making myself invisible that I had forgotten I deserved more, and you weren't ready to see me. You were so caught up in work, in fear, in the walls you had built around your heart." She leaned into him, feeling his arm wrap around her shoulders. "We grew into each other. We became the people who could do this, who could love each other properly, and maybe that took longer than we would have liked. But we got here. That is what matters. You are right." He pressed a kiss to her hair, as usual. "I am always right. It is one of my best qualities, among many." He turned her face toward him, his expression serious despite the lightness of their words. "I see you, Vivienne. Every day I see you, and I will never stop being grateful that you gave me a second chance. You gave yourself a second chance. You fought for it. You changed. That is not something I did. That is something you chose. I chose you." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "The best choice I ever made." "We're two." He kissed him then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 8 years of longing and 5 years of fulfillment, a kiss that said everything and promised more. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too, forever." Somewhere in the back of Vive too, forever. About the moment she had decided to walk away, to save herself, to stop being invisible, even if it meant losing the man she loved. It had been the hardest thing she had ever done, and it had led her here, to a life she had never dared to dream of, to a love that had been worth every moment of waiting, to a man who had finally learned to see what had been in front of him all along. At B, FICTIONAL story teaches something proud, love and self, beaches, features, waiters, sidosing, yourso, wend, lowal z. Fita pichu lisi teach falsch, de fides dit dash lay, siles, audidaway, it is self-reshek, audidas sidosing, yourso veiling yourself. Some's the bravest thing you can do is leave, even when every part of you wants to stay. It teaches us that fear of rejection can cost us years of happiness. Julian spent 6 years loving Vivienne in silence, because he was afraid of ruining what they had, afraid of being rejected, afraid of being vulnerable. And that fear kept them both trapped in a limbo of longing and missed connections. It teaches us that love is not just a feeling, but a choice made daily. It requires action, presence, the willingness to fight for what matters. Leon did not win Vivienne back with grand gestures alone. He won her back by changing, by showing up, by choosing her over his fears and his work and everything else that had kept them apart. And it teaches us that it is never too late to speak your heart. The words left unspoken are the ones that haunt us most. But it is never too late to say I love you. It is never too late to reach for what you want. It is never too late to be brave. If it touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like right now. Share it with someone who believes in second chances and love that is worth the wait. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me what you loved most about Tianane and Julian's journey. Was it courage to walk away, his transformation, their healing together? Comments mean the world to me and help me create more stories like this one. Until next time. Remember this, you are never invisible. You are worthy of being seen, of being chosen, of being loved loudly. Do not settle for less. Do not make yourself small for people who cannot appreciate your light. And if you are waiting for someone to see you, to choose you, to love you the way you deserve, know that your wait is not in vain. Sometimes the love we are searching for has been right beside us all along, but we have to be brave enough to see it and bold enough to reach for it.